All right, so now we're going to do a little applied ethics. We're going to be taking some of the concepts we've discussed and applying them to the environment. This, of course, an important topic of discussion right now. We've got our tar sands oil leak in Arkansas. We have lots of environmentalists protesting the expansion of the Keystone Pipeline. Even in East Texas, there are protests going on as they're trying to block this oil pipeline, and of course they're doing so because they believe it will harm the environment. So kind of the fundamental question that we have to ask when we think about the environment is what is our relationship to the environment in general? That is, what is our responsibility, if any, and how do we determine where our responsibility begins and ends? So for this, we're going to just give some background on environmental ethics, some kind of basic approaches, and look at some of the normative theories that we've discussed and see where they would come out on this particular dilemma concerning environmental ethics. So environmental ethics really doesn't become a subdiscipline until the 1970s, so it's a relatively new area of study. So a couple of things. First and foremost, that we've talked about these definitions before. So these are important for our discussion of the environment and how we value animals, plant life, etc. Right? So you have intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is when a thing has value simply by virtue of its existence. That a thing is valuable because it is. There is something inherent within the thing that is deserving of recognition, that it has value because it is. Now the second definition, instrumental value, this is going to be something that we can use as a means, that a thing has instrumental value if we need only value it because of, let's say, the service it can provide. Right, so when we think about the environment, intrinsic value would be the environment has value in and of itself, that we must value, say, animals simply because they exist, that they have a value. Instrumental value would argue that we need only value animals in terms of the service they can provide us. So we need only recognize what they can provide. Okay, so we're going to go through differing perspectives on, or differing approaches to environmental ethics. And so first we're going to look at what we're going to call the Christian Platonic ethic. That is, what does Christian teaching and what would Plato say about our obligation to the environment? And this is an interesting chart here showing species discovered and yet to be discovered, which is in some ways humorous, right? If they haven't been discovered, right, you get it. Okay, so the Platonic Christian ethic, if you'll recall, right, earlier in the semester we talked about Plato and his connection to Christian teaching, right? Your foremost objective is to be concerned with those higher values, right? So for Plato, it was coming to an understanding of formal reality. Christianity would be, having an understanding of God, putting yourself in line with the divine. So, in order to focus on these higher values, you must turn away from the physical world, right? For Plato, those physical things are distractions. They're simply copies of the real stuff, which would be the forms. And in Christianity, we can think about, say, earthly things, that you need to turn away from the physical, that they are distractions, that they will lead you astray. And so, in this case, the environment only has instrumental value. That is, it only has value in terms of what it can provide for humans. And there are some understandings of biblical texts that would tell us that we have dominion, we have control, right? We are in charge. Now the next would be the Kantian ethic, and we discussed this somewhat in class, that for Kant, the only that we're concerned about our own moral development, and the only things deserving of our moral consideration are going to be those things that can reason, right? And so, harming animals, harming the environment, may indicate some failing in our character, right? And perhaps our unwillingness to, if you think about, say, the connection between air pollution, for instance. If you think about the negative effect air pollution would have on other people, then that could be part of your moral consideration, because you have to consider what kind of impact this is going to have on other people. That is, do you end up using them as a means to your end, right? And your end might be to, drive a diesel truck that runs on, farm diesel or red diesel or something that is more polluting than a regular diesel motor, just as an awful example. So, in terms of its effect on other people, right, you can make judgments about the environment, but even then, the environment still only has instrumental value, because animals, plant life, does not have the ability to reason. Those things can only be viewed as having instrumental value, not intrinsic value. And lastly are utilitarians. And if you recall, those things deserving of moral consideration are going to be those things that can experience pleasure and pain. Our utilitarians are concerned with non-moral consequences, right? And so here we're just discussing specifically animals, right? That animals can show preference, and our utilitarians turn out to be really some of the first, what we might call animal rights activists or enthusiasts, because they can show preference, because they would rather not do something because it causes them pain. We must give them moral consideration. All right, so here's some early environmental ethics publications. Aldo Leopold, his Sand County Almanac, very famous. John Muir founds the Sierra Club, and this text here is his viewing the national parks. And so both of these fellows argue that there is a value in the environment and that it should be protected. And so this is a quote from Leopold, and this kind of sums up his position when it comes to our responsibility to the environment. That is, how do we decide if we're doing the right thing when it comes to the environment? So for Leopold, when you're deciding whether or not what you're going to do is moral or immoral, you should consider if it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, right? That's when it's the right thing to do. And then, easily enough, when it does the other, it's immoral. And this very famous Norwegian climber, he gives us these two now famous divisions in terms of ecology. We have shallow ecology and we have deep ecology. Shallow ecology, you can see, is treating the environment as only instrumental, right? That we should prevent pollution and prevent resource depletion and protect animals, etc., because we are concerned about the future success of humans, right? So again, instrumental. That's shallow ecology. Now the other, deep ecology, this is a belief that man is simply one part of the environment, that we are one aspect of the biosphere, that we are as valuable as other things within the environment. So this pays close attention to our interconnectivity with, air, water, soil, and the fellow we noticed earlier, Leopold, who gives us the Sand County Almanac, goes even further and gives us what we know as his land ethic. And Leopold actually believed that the environment should be prized above human interest. Right? So deep ecology would say we are on the same level as other things in the environment. Shallow ecology would argue that we need only protect the environment to protect our future selves, and then Leopold would take it even further with his land ethic and argue that we should prize the environment over and above ourselves. So deep ecology and Leopold's land ethic, this gives rise to a lot of what in the media have been called radical environmental groups. That would be the Earth First movement, who are famous for burning down timber companies' headquarters. They're famous for driving iron spikes into trees that are going to be cut down for logging, etc. So these concepts, right, are very important in terms of how we treat the environment and how we react to any sort of environmental degradation or what we find to be things harming the environment. And then Peter Singer. Now, you noticed in your reading that Peter Singer takes a specifically utilitarian perspective on our obligation to animals. That that he likens he gives us the term, right, speciesism, and he likens that to a racism, sexism, etc. And so that's where we're going to pick up on Wednesday.